And here's the game. Who wants to be a Pain Franchise Billionaire? That's what motivated them all along. And there's one simple question that they had to answer and had to change the path of history to try to make it happen. They had to convince people that you wouldn't get addicted to their opioids. And so here's what happens. Now when we go and we ask what will happen about opioid addiction, let's look what they did. If I was back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I might believe that the answer to this is A, it's less than 1%. Why would I believe that? Because this company went out and sponsored lies, relying on things like Porter and Jig, saying that the risk of addiction was less than 1%. But they didn't just do it in the 90s, they did it in this very courtroom. They continued to perpetuate this lie to try to protect their backside, because that's what Johnson & Johnson does. So, is the answer really 1%, or is it that the risk of addiction is less than 2.6%? You saw they brought a nice lady, Drew Dieselhorst, into our state to talk to doctors and try to educate them as a pain expert, but they never told her the truth. You know, she was just doing what they told her to do. And one of the things they told her was tell doctors that the rate and incidence of addiction is extremely low. It's 2.6%. So, you know, if you're a doctor and you hear these things, you probably believe maybe the rate of addiction really is low. But is that what it is? I don't know. So we can just call one of their experts. You know, why don't we just call and phone a friend, call one of their experts, and ask him what the rate is.
Timothy Vaughn. About 1 in 4 who actually receive a prescription for opiates at some point in their career will develop an addiction to that. That's really powerful. So in other words, every 1 out of 4 patients that get opiates at some point are going to develop an addiction. That's really focused stuff.
1 out of 4. So maybe Dr. Fong was right. We sure know before they paid him to come in here that what he said was 1 in 4 people who receive prescription opioids long-term struggle from substance use disorder. And he's talking about non-cancer pain in the doctor's setting. So is he right? I'm sure like me, doctors were really confused. So, you know, I had this coin at opening statement. Remember that? Let's just flip it and go 50-50 and see what the answer really is. So is the answer 25%, or is it nobody knows, as we heard from Johnson & Johnson? So you know, what we can do is we can look at all the experts that have testified in this case, and we'll just poll the audience. Let's look at the folks that they call on. Well, we know Dr. Fong says it's 25%. You heard Dr. Chladni talk about prevalence of addiction being as high as 25%. And then we got Dr. Muchmore, the brother of one of the senior partners at Purdue's law firm. They brought him in here as a testifying doctor, not as an expert. And I don't think they knew what he was going to say when Mr. Whidden put him under cross-examination. But what he said is, if you take opioids long enough, there is a 100% chance you will get addicted. And if you try to bring someone in to tell you as a doctor that's not true, that's utter nonsense. Very similar to what Jason Beeman said as well. Or we could look at Bruce Moskowitz, one of their star witnesses. You know, Bruce Moskowitz was a company man for decades at Johnson & Johnson. But to get him to come here and testify, they had to pay him to do it. And when they brought him in here, they brought these tortured studies, Fishbane and Cochrane and others, to try to confuse the court about the difference between prevalence and incidence of addiction. But what you heard him say under Drew Pate's very vigorous cross-examination was to say that one rate about addiction is meaningless. But let me just stop there for a second. We're in an opioid crisis. There are children watching this case. There are doctors watching this case. There is you as the judge having to make this very difficult decision. And in the midst of it all, they brought this man in here to rely on studies that their own experts, their own internal people said were weak and unreliable. They brought a study in here that suggested that the rates of addiction were as low as 0.14%. I mean, that is worse than Porter and Jig. That's egregious, reckless, dangerous conduct. But that's the conduct of a company that will do anything to save itself.